In our previous videos, we described the process for taking a picture using the camera from an Android application, and we also described how to set up a file provider and provider path. In this video, we're going to start the implicit intent where we invoke the camera. So we are going to basically press this button and toggle the camera with the eventual goal of saving the image to the SD card. So let's start by looking at this activity. I'm going to navigate to the GPS plant activity, which is what this one is. And actually before that, let's take a look at that layout. This is going to be content GPS plant. And I'm simply going to grab the ID of the button. So that's going to be important. This is BTN photo. I'm going to copy that, so the ID of that button. And now I'm going to go to GPS plant. And in GPS plant, we're going to make a button handler for our photo, for our little photo button. We've already implemented butter knife, so it's going to make this a lot easier to do because we simply need an @onClick annotation. So we'll say public void take photo. That'll work. Open and close paren. Open curly and close curly, and that defines our method. Now let's use butter knife to wire up this method to that button. We simply use @onClick, and we can follow the same syntax we have above. r.id, which is the constants file where we have constants for each of our widget IDs, if you will, and then paste BTN photo. Okay, good. Save. And this is the button click handler. So this is kind of like a controller. It's the button click handler. We're going to need to do a bit of heavy lifting for taking the photo. And so we're going to need a couple of other methods as well. So I'll start by invoking a method that we'll call simply prep invoke camera. And this is where we're going to take a look at some permissions. So prep invoke camera, alt enter, create method. There we go. Private, that makes sense because this won't be called from outside our application. Now, we simply need to see if we have permissions. So permissions, check. Okay, and I'm going to say if check self permission, and we'll say manifest.permission.camera. Now you might say, wait a minute, we already did this in a previous video when we were doing the color capture activity. Doesn't matter. You never know in what order a user is going to use your application, and a user can also revoke permission. So it's a good idea to always check for the permission. So check self permission, and what we're saying is we're checking this permission, and that's going to return to us either permission granted or not granted. So if we want to see if it's granted, we say package manager.permission granted. Now once again, I did cover permissions in a previous video, so I'm going to hit this a little more quickly than normal, but I can point you back to a different video if you want to know more about how this works. Now, I'm going to take a liberty here. Check self permission was only available in API level 23. My current minimum is 21. But 23 and greater is all that's really currently supported. So long-term approach, what I should do is go to my build.gradle, and I should bump this minimum SDK version to 23. As a matter of fact, why don't I just go ahead and do that and save myself the headache? If not, I have to do some backwards compatibility checks. Make sure the build's still good. Now, after a few patient moments, the build has finished. Let's go back to GPS plant, and we'll give that just a moment. Boop, there we go. Red line's gone. So the only caveat is now we can't be installed on devices older than 23, but that's a small number of devices right now. So if we already have the permission, we're in good shape. Let's go ahead and call a method invoke camera. This method does not exist, but the trick is we're going to need to do this logic in multiple places, so it makes the most sense to make a method out of it. So we invoke the method, we create the method, and there we go. Now this is kind of the straightforward part. If we don't have permission, then we have to request it. So I'm going to say else, and then we're going to say string, make it an array, permission request equals curly manifest.permission.camera. One thing I explained in the previous video is that this is essentially a string array that we are declaring and instantiating all in one line. That's why we need these curlies. If you did not have the curlies, this would not compile. The curlies indicate that that's not an individual string, but instead it's an array of strings. It happens to only have one element. After that, we say request permissions, And we'll say permission request, which are the permissions we are requesting, that array that we made up above. And then we need some kind of thumbprint, some kind of unique number. We'll go with 1996. How about that? Now, 1996, if we have it right there, is essentially a magic number. It's not a descriptive number. It's just a unique identifier so that when we hear back from the user, whether they've authorized or declined this permission, then we know which permission request initiated the entire sequence. So it might make a little more sense when we finish the implementation, so let me continue. Now, it is a magic number. I want to have self-describing code because self-describing code means you don't need as many inline comments. So Control-Alt-C, and let's call this camera permission request code. And you can see up above, it is basically telling me how it is going to define this constant. Just do a mental screen capture of what you see right up here, and I hit enter. And now let's look up above, and what do we see right up here? That's exactly the line it just showed us. So Control-Alt-C, that is a shortcut in Android Studio that helps us to turn a magic number into a constant, just as I've shown you. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. We have we do need to handle the permission response. So what I'm going to do is make a new method called onRequestPermissionResult. Now, do you see how it kind of knew what I wanted to do? It even gave me some not null annotations here. That's because we're overwriting a method, and when I started typing, it says, oh, okay, I see here's a public method in a superclass that you can overwrite. Now look at what we have here. Request code. What's that? That's that thumbprint, that unique identifier, that 1996 that we described earlier, because this will be called anytime we do a request permission, and we can do request permissions more than once in a single activity. So that's our self-addressed stamped envelope that's calling us back. Then we have the permissions that were requested as an array, and then we have the results of what the user said. Did the user allow or decline these permissions? So the first thing we need to do is we need to say if the request code that was passed in is the same as the camera permission request code earlier, then we know we're hearing back from the camera. Okay, and what we can now say is if grant results, that's our permission over here. That's basically a list of yes or no, what permissions they granted. Now we only asked for one permission, so this becomes very easy. Grant results 0. That indicates did the user say yes or no to the very first permission. For the second permission, it would be grant results 1. For the third permission, it would be grant results 3, because we can't ask for multiple permissions at once. But we've made it simple. We're only asking for one. So grant result 0, and then we're going to say equal. Remember this up here? Package manager dot permission granted. Very similar logic, only this time we have just prompted the user to accept or decline this permission. So if grant result 0, package manager, permission granted, then guess what we're going to do? Call the invoke camera. So we call the invoke camera method. If not, we want to just tell the, what we ought to do is just disable that camera button. That's probably, I don't know if I have that one locally, so I'm not going to worry about it, but as an alternative, we can disable the button and we can inform the user. So toast.makeText this, and then say unable to invoke camera without permission. Okay, and then toast.lengthLong, and then .show. Okay, so here, unable to invoke camera without permission, extract string resource, no camera permission, and we do this because it goes into the strings.xml file, which is down here under values, strings XML, and that makes our application easier to translate into multiple languages. So we're looking pretty good. Next thing we need to do is actually invoke the camera. So let's work on that. We start with an intent. So I'm going to say intent, camera intent equals new intent. And then this is an implicit intent because we're just saying what we want to do. And what we want to do is capture an image. We're not saying how we want to do it. So I say Android.provider.mediastore.actionImageCapture. Okay, start that. Now we need to give this intent a little bit more information. We need to start by getting a path to the images directory. Okay, and so I say get external files directory. You see that's a method that I'm inheriting. And then environment.directory pictures. So that is just an indicator of the directory where pictures go that can be shared between applications. Now, what do I do with this? I need to save the result of this method, the return value of this method, to a variable. So Control-Alt-V makes it a local variable, and I'm going to call it image path. Next, we need to create an image file at this path. So I'm going to say new file. Now, a file object in Java can either represent a directory or a file. So I say new file, and the first thing that I'm going to pass in is the image path, and then I'm going to say just image.jpg. We're going to hard code it for now. I don't recommend that in the long run because that means you're only going to have one image, image.jpg. And anytime you take a new picture, it's going to overwrite the previous image. Control-Alt-V on that constructor is going to assign this object to a new variable. Let's call it pic_file, just like so. So a little bit more. Because of the new file provider syntax, we can't just pass a file directly to the camera. We have to convert it to a URI. So convert file to URI. A bit more generic, a universal resource indicator. Okay, so I say file provider. Ooh, look at that guy, file provider. Does that ring a bell? Android.support.v4.content. If I double shift and go to Android Manifest, oh, look at that, Android.support.v4.content.file_provider. So we're saying this is the guy who I need right now, and it is configured in this Android manifest. I did that in a previous video, so if you're curious how I set that up, just take a peek at the video that precedes this on my videos list. So I go back to GPS_plant, and we say file provider. .get URI for file. So now we're using this file provider that we've configured and we've given it certain permissions, and we're saying, can you get me a URI for this file? So this, and then we're going to say get application context .get package name. Now what does that resolve to? We go to build.gradle. And remember this application ID, edu.uc jonesbr plant places. It just happens to be the same as our package name here, edu.uc.jonesbr.plant places. But note that that's associated with the name application ID. If I go to Android Manifest and I take a look at where this file provider was defined, we're going to see that it's referencing that variable application ID and then .provider. So kind of a weird way to do it, but everything eventually connects the dots. So get package name. What we want is we want this entire unit that I'm currently working on to look like what this will resolve to. And we know that this will resolve to the application ID here, edu.uc jonesbr plant places, and then it will follow it with .provider. If I go back to GPS_plant, get application .get package name resolves to edu.uc.jonesbr.plant places, and then I simply need to say, okay, add that .provider extension to it. Finally, that entire unit will refer to the file provider that I set up in the Android manifest. I know that's a bit confusing. It didn't make sense to me the first few times I did it either, but nonetheless, that's the way it works now. So, okay. So get URI for file. Now we need to do something with this, so I'm going to say Control-Alt-V and save this to a variable. We'll just call it URI. Okay, next I'm going to say camera intent and put extra. And what I'm saying here is I'm telling the camera where to save the image. So camera intent.put extra, and let's say Android. I have to kind of get associated with the name that the camera's looking for. So Android.provider.mediastore.extra output. Did a little consolidation there for me. Thank you very much. And then here's where I want to save it, to this URI. Next, I need to pass permission to the camera Okay, I'll put a comment up here. Where do I want to save the image? Okay, pass the permission to the camera. For this, I'm going to say camera intent dot set flags, and we'll say flag grant write URI permission. So I'm proxying permission over to the camera with this grant write URI permission. And I think we're good now. I always end up forgetting something, but I think we're good. So start activity for result, and let's pass in that intent, the camera intent that we made up above. And next, we need one of those self-addressed stamped envelopes or one of those thumbprints. I know I used 1996 before. Let's go to 1995. And really no meaning to that number, just something unique. For me, I can associate that year with a year I did something, a year I was in college. So it makes sense to me. So Control-Alt-C, we're going to call this camera request code. Just like so, make a constant out of it, make it a bit more readable. Now this is an interesting situation because it's going to invoke onActivityResult. Take a quick peek, make sure we have that onActivity. Oh, we don't. Okay, so we'll make that. We're going to make this onActivityResult method, which we're toggling the camera and then we're hearing back from the camera. What's funny is we don't really have to do anything on that onActivityResult method in this case because the camera's doing the work of saving the image to the SD card. But just for completeness, onActivityResult, okay? And you see we have our request code, which is this constant we made up here, the result code that tells us whether the user said okay or cancel, and then data, which is any data that's passed back to us. In this case, we're not going to need any data that's passed back. But nonetheless, let's say if result code equal result okay. That means the user pressed OK and didn't hit the back button or didn't cancel out of the image. Then we're going to say if request code equal camera request code. Sorry, camera request code. We'll do it just like so. Okay. Now, this means that we're successful. I could do something like maybe record the image name or something like that in here. What I would normally do is just change a color, maybe change a color on the screen, vibrate the phone. We don't want to over-notify the user, but nonetheless, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do a toast.makeText, and we'll say this, comma, and then camera, or say picture saved, and then toast.lengthLong, and then .show. And of course, as we usually do, we go ahead and extract this string resource to our strings.xml, and we say picture saved. And OK. One more thing we want to do, we want to go to the Android manifest file, and because we may be requesting this permission, we have to add a line in here. It uses permission, Android name, Android permission camera. In the old days, that's all you had to do was put it in there. Nowadays, you do have to do the just-in-time permission request as well. So with that, let's take a look at the application. Now I go to GPS plant. I have set a few breakpoints for us so we can look through the source code. I choose the camera icon. Note that the first breakpoint steps on prep invoke camera. So it's saying, do I have this permission? I do not. If I did, I'd go straight to invoke camera. Let's request the permission. I'm going to choose F9, and as soon as I choose F9, you'll see a little request dialog pop up here. So I choose F9, we come over, and it says allow planned places to take pictures and record video. What the hell? Let's say no. Let's say deny. So in the denial, it comes up, realizes the permission was not granted, and in just a moment, we'll see that we have unable to invoke camera without permission. Now that's not permanent. We can always ask again if the user tries again. So we click, maybe the user made a mistake. So we click, we end up with this same logic as before, check self-permission. We have not been granted the permission. Let's request the permission. A little dialog comes up. This time, let's choose allow. We choose allow, and now we're back on the onRequest permission result. Was the permission granted? The permission was granted, so now we can invoke the camera and take a look, the camera's up. One more breakpoint I'm going to set actually is in the onActivity result, so we can watch it come back here. So we see it does a little camera emulator, and I snap the picture, and then I'm prompted to accept or go back or to cancel. I'm going to go ahead and accept this picture. When I accept the picture, notice that I get a callback in this onActivity result, and that will show a toast. Whoop. That will show a toast. Oh, that looks like I just missed it, but nonetheless shows a toast to say that the image was taken. So that's a look at how to take a picture and save it to the SD card. One thing we still need to do, which I'm going to do in the next video, and that is make a unique image name. Because right now we're rewriting the same image over and over again in the same place. We need to do something to give it a unique name each time we take a new image so it has a unique place on the SD card. We'll cover that in the next video. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.